Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Now, let's start the story. The radio blared through the tinny speakers mounted in the corners of the gym. It was the early morning rush, a sea of bodies sweating through their routines, grunting under the strain of iron weights, and pounding their shoes against the rubber belts of treadmills. The air was heavy with the tang of sweat, the dull whir of machines, and the thud of barbells hitting the mats. "Nothing wrong with me," the radio crackled, the familiar growl of "let the bodies hit the floor" building in intensity. The song was a favorite of the gym regulars, its raw energy syncing perfectly with the atmosphere. The gym's owner, a man named Marcus, stood behind the front desk, nursing a black coffee and glancing at the clock. Another day, another grind. Outside, the streets of the city were unusually quiet. The usual cacophony of horns and chatter was absent, replaced by an eerie stillness. A gray haze hung in the air, and a faint metallic scent drifted through the cracked open windows of the gym. Marcus frowned, setting his coffee down to peer out onto the street. A figure shuffled in the distance, unsteady and aimless. Inside, no one noticed. "Push it!" yelled Jonah, a wiry personal trainer, his voice cutting through the music. He clapped his hands, encouraging his client, a middle-aged man struggling to press a barbell above his chest. "You got one more in you." The beat of the song dropped, shaking the gym. The treadmills buzzed louder as runners adjusted their speeds, sweat dripping from their brows. No one saw the figure outside stumble closer. No one noticed the second figure appearing. Then a third, their movements mechanical, like a puppet with invisible strings. The radio's volume masked the faint, guttural groans. Marcus's frown deepened. The glass doors vibrated as something slammed into them. Heads turned. A muffled scream echoed from outside, faint but distinct. Marcus moved toward the entrance, a sense of unease crawling up his spine. The doors shattered. A figure, bloodied and twitching, hurled itself through the glass. Shards rained down, glinting in the fluorescent lights. The radio kept playing, the song reaching its chorus, "Let the bodies hit the floor. Let the bodies hit the floor. Let the booties hit the floor," as the figure's head snapped up, revealing hollow, bloodshot eyes and a mouth caked with gore. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered, stepping back. The creature lunged, its guttural snarl reverberating in the room. Marcus raised his hands in defense, but it was too fast. Teeth sank into his forearm, ripping flesh, veins and muscle. He screamed, a sound drowned out by the music. The gym erupted into chaos. The creature released Marcus and turned on the nearest person, a woman on a treadmill. She tried to run, but the machine carried her into the waiting arms of the infected. Blood sprayed across the mirrors, ceiling, then pooling on the floor as it tore into her throat. More figures spilled through the broken entrance, their moans blending with the pounding music. Jonah reacted first. Grabbing a barbell, he swung it with all his strength, the steel connecting with the skull of the nearest creature. The impact sent a sickening crack through the air, and the body crumpled, hitting the floor. "Everyone, get to the back," he yelled, his voice commanding over the screams. People scrambled, knocking over equipment and each other in their panic. One man tripped over a weight rack, and the infected were on him in seconds, tearing at his flesh. The song blared, its violent energy now an ironic backdrop to the carnage. Jonah swung again, keeping the monsters at bay as a small group huddled near the back exit. "Move, move," Jonah shouted, his adrenaline spiking. He slammed the barbell into another infected, its head snapping back as it fell. Blood splattered his face, warm and metallic. "Out the back door now!" Marcus stumbled, clutching his bleeding arm. His eyes were glassy, his breathing shallow. "Leave me," he muttered, but Jonah grabbed him by the collar. "Shut up and walk," Jonah barked, dragging him toward the group. The infected swarmed, their numbers growing as more bodies stumbled in from the street. One grabbed at Jonah, its gray, bloodied fingers clawing at his shirt. He swung the barbell again, caving in the chest of the zombie. The group burst through the back exit into an alley. The air outside was thick with smoke, and the distant sound of sirens and gunshots echoed through the city. Jonah slammed the door shut, wedging a piece of broken pipe against the handle. "Keep moving," he ordered, scanning their surroundings. The survivors, a mix of gym-goers and staff, were wide-eyed and trembling. A woman clutched her arm, her sleeve soaked with blood. Another man held a dumbbell, his knuckles white as he gripped it like a lifeline. "Where do we go?" someone whispered, their voice cracking. Jonah looked down the alley, then up at the rooftops. The infected were still inside, but it wouldn't take them long to break through. "We need higher ground," he said. "Stay close and stay quiet." The group moved cautiously, stepping over debris and broken glass. The city was unrecognizable. Fires burned in the distance, their smoke curling into the gray sky. Cars were abandoned in the streets, their doors hanging open, engines still running. Bodies, some moving, some still, littered the sidewalks. The metallic scent of blood was everywhere. Jonah led them to a fire escape. "Up," he said, motioning for them to climb. The survivors hesitated, their faces pale. "Go!" Jonah snapped, his patience thinning. One by one, they ascended the rickety ladder. Jonah stayed at the bottom, keeping watch. He could hear them, the groans, the shuffling footsteps getting closer. Marcus was the last to climb. His movements were sluggish, his breaths labored. Jonah's eyes narrowed. The bite on Marcus's arm was blackened at the edges, veins spreading like spiderwebs around the wound. "You're not looking so good," Jonah said, his tone cold. Marcus shook his head. "Just get me up there." Jonah hesitated, then nodded. He helped Marcus onto the fire escape before pulling himself up. Below, the infected poured into the alley, their numbers overwhelming. They reached for the ladder, their grotesque faces, teeth and lips coated with blood. They were snapping up at the survivors. Jonah led the group onto the roof. They were safe, for now. The city stretched out before them, a sprawling graveyard of steel and concrete. Fires burned in clusters, their smoke merging with the ash-filled sky. The radio station still played faintly from somewhere below, the song's distorted final notes echoing eerily. The booties certainly hit the floor. Jay, across town. John T., a middle-aged martial artist with a wiry build and a penchant for classic boots, was in his favorite store, the Lone Star Boot Emporium, across town. The smell of aged leather and polished wood filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of coffee from the pot behind the counter. It was more than just a store to John. It was a sanctuary. The kind of place where you could shoot a game of pool with friends, talk about the latest action movies, and try on boots that made you feel invincible. John was crouched on a low stool, admiring his reflection in the polished mirror at the base of a display rack. The boots he was trying on were a snazzy pair of classic black leather, with intricate stitching along the sides, the perfect pair for dancing the night away at the honky-tonk. He flexed his foot, testing the snug fit, when a sudden burst of static from the old TV in the corner caught his attention. The small, dusty screen flickered to life, and a somber-faced news anchor appeared. "Breaking news," the anchor said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "Reports of violent attacks are spreading across town. The mayor is recommending that everyone stay home and avoid contact with unknown individuals at all costs." A gruff voice interrupted the tense moment. "Turn that darn TV off, man. It's killing the vibe," barked a burly customer leaning on a pool cue. He wore a worn cowboy hat tilted low over his eyes, a scowl pulling at his weathered face. The cashier, a lanky kid named Pete, who couldn't have been older than 20, hesitated, glancing nervously between the TV and the irritated customer. "Sure thing, Hank," he mumbled, switching off the TV. The screen faded to black, leaving the room in a slightly tense silence. Pete quickly fumbled with his phone and connected it to the store's speaker system. Moments later, the iconic disco beat of the Bee Gees' "Stayin' Alive" filled the air. John chuckled, shaking his head. "Classic choice," he muttered to himself, standing to test his balance in the boots. He tapped the toe against the floor, satisfied with the sound. Suddenly, the front door burst open with a deafening crash. The jangling bell above it was silenced as it clattered to the ground. A collective gasp filled the room as a horde of grotesque figures stumbled in. Their clothes were ragged and soaked in blood, their eyes clouded and lifeless. They moved with a horrifying combination of mechanical swiftness and animalistic hunger. The groans that escaped their rotting mouths were nearly drowned out by the music, but the stench, a vile mixture of decay and filth, was unmistakable. It hit the occupants like a physical blow, and John instinctively covered his nose. Hank was the first to speak. What in tarnation? His question was cut short as one of the creatures lunged forward. Its yellowed blood-stained teeth sank into his neck with a sickening crunch. Hank's scream filled the room, a terrible, guttural sound that sent chills down everyone's spine. Blood sprayed across the vinyl floor as Hank fell, his hat tumbling off his head. Pete let out a panicked yell and ducked behind the counter. "Oh God! What the hell is happening?" John didn't wait for an answer. His martial arts training kicked in, his body moving before his mind could catch up. He grabbed a nearby stool and hurled it at the nearest zombie, the wooden legs shattering against its decayed chest. The creature staggered but didn't fall. John pivoted on his heel and delivered a roundhouse kick to its head. The force of the blow sent the zombie crashing into a display of cowboy hats. "Pete, toss me something!" John shouted, his voice steady despite the chaos. The young cashier fumbled beneath the counter and emerged holding a pool cue. With trembling hands, he tossed it to John, who caught it mid-spin. The weapon felt light in his hands, but it would have to do. John spun the cue, gripping it like a staff. He took a defensive stance as the zombies advanced. One by one, they came at him, their lifeless faces twisted into grotesque masks of hunger. John met them head-on, his movements fluid and precise. A thrust to the gut knocked one back. A sweep of the cue took out another's legs, sending it sprawling to the floor. He twirled the makeshift weapon above his head and brought it down with a crack, splitting a zombie's skull as hair and bone stuck to the cue. The Beegie's upbeat rhythm played on, staying alive, a surreal contrast to the carnage unfolding. "Well, now I get low and I get high, and if I can't get either, I really try." John leaped onto a display table, using the height to his advantage. He delivered a flying jump kick to a zombie, sending it crashing into a rack of boots. Another came at him from the side, and he spun, the pool cue connecting with its temple in a clean, powerful strike. The creature's neck snapped to the side at an unnatural angle as it crumpled to the ground. "John, behind you!" Pete's voice rang out from his hiding spot. John turned just in time to see a zombie lunging for him. He sidestepped, using the momentum to drive the butt of the pool cue into its jaw. Teeth shattered, and the creature reeled back. John followed up with a spinning back kick that sent it sprawling into its companions. The stench was overwhelming now, like a mix of rotting meat and sewage. John's eyes watered, but he didn't falter. He moved with the precision of a seasoned fighter, his strikes calculated and efficient. Each zombie that fell added to the growing pool of blood on the floor. The once pristine vinyl was now a slick, crimson battlefield. Hank, or what was left of him, began to stir. His bloodied hands clawed at the floor as he let out a low, guttural growl. John's stomach churned. "Damn it, Hank," he muttered, raising the pool cue like a spear. With a quick thrust, he ended his former acquaintance's suffering. The music continued, its irony not lost on John. "Life going nowhere. Somebody help me." Pete peeked over the counter, his face pale. "John, what do we do?" "We survive," John said firmly, his chest heaving. "Barricade the doors. Grab anything you can use as a weapon. We're not out of this yet." Pete nodded, scrambling to stack chairs and tables against the shattered entrance. The zombies outside pressed against the glass, their grotesque faces smearing blood and filth across the panes. John surveyed the room. The survivors, what few were left, huddled together, their faces masks of fear. He tightened his grip on the pool cue, determination hardening his features. "Staying alive," he muttered under his breath, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Guess we don't have a choice." Across town, Dale sat slumped in his seat near the back of the train car, his hood pulled up and headphones in, drowning out the low hum of the engine beneath the city streets. His playlist wasn't enough to block out the relentless monotony of his commute to his dead-end job at SingStar Karaoke, a dingy bar nestled in the city's seediest corner. At 29 years old, Dale often wondered if he'd ever escape this cycle. Late-night shifts, drunk patrons belting off key renditions of Bohemian Rhapsody, and tips barely worth pocketing. Journey's Don't Stop Believin' played through his headphones, the familiar lyrics striking a chord with him as he gazed out the window at the city blurring past. "Just a small-town boy, living in a lonely world," Steve Perry's voice crooned, mirroring Dale's own feelings of insignificance. He mouthed the words silently, his fingers drumming against his knee in time with the beat. The train rattled along the tracks, its fluorescent lights flickering intermittently. Dale adjusted the volume on his headphones, his gaze wandering lazily around the sparsely populated car. A young couple whispered to each other near the middle, their heads close together, oblivious to the world around them. A man in a suit clutched a briefcase, his face pale and tense, tapping his foot impatiently. Further down, a woman in her 60s knitted furiously, her needles clicking in rhythm with the train's movement. Dale exhaled, pulling out one earbud. The faint chatter of passengers and the occasional squeal of the train's wheels reached his ears. He glanced toward the connecting door at the end of the car and froze. A figure stood on the other side of the glass, its face obscured by shadow. It swayed unnaturally, bumping against the door as though trying to push through but unable to grasp the handle. He frowned, sitting up straighter. The figure moved again, more forcefully this time. The lights flickered, plunging the car into darkness for a split second before buzzing back to life. Dale's breath caught as he saw the figure clearly for the first time. The man, if it could be called that, was grotesque. Blood smeared its chin, and its cloudy, lifeless eyes locked onto Dale through the glass. Its movements were jerky, like a marionette being manipulated by an amateur puppeteer. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" Dale called out, his voice cutting through the quiet. Several passengers turned to look at him, then followed his gaze toward the figure. The suited man scoffed. "Great, another drunk." The woman knitting glanced up, her needles pausing mid-stitch. "Doesn't look right to me." The train lurched, throwing Dale forward in his seat. A collective gasp rippled through the passengers as the connecting door rattled violently. The figure's head slammed against the glass, leaving a streak of blood. It groaned, a deep, guttural sound that set Dale's teeth on edge. The train's lights flickered again. When they came back, chaos erupted. The door between the cars burst open, the figure spilling through with a horrifying shriek. Blood dripped from its gaping mouth as it lunged at the nearest passenger, the suited man. The man tried to push it away, but the creature sank its teeth into his shoulder, tearing through fabric and flesh. His screams filled the car as he fell to the floor, writhing in agony. Dale tore off his headphones, but the song's refrain echoed in his mind. "Don't stop believing." He scrambled to his feet as the other passengers screamed and pushed toward the opposite end of the car. The young couple clung to each other, their eyes wide with terror. "What is that thing?" the girl shrieked. "Move!" Dale barked, grabbing the man's arm and shoving him toward the next car. "Get to the front!" More figures appeared at the far end of the train, their grotesque forms spilling in from the connecting cars. Their movements were slow but relentless, their groans creating a macabre symphony that drowned out the panicked cries of the living. Dale's heart pounded as he grabbed a metal pole for support, his mind racing. The older woman dropped her knitting and stood, her hands trembling. "This can't be real! This can't be real! Lady, go!" Dale shouted, waving her toward the door. She hesitated for a moment, then stumbled forward, clutching her purse like a lifeline. One of the creatures lunged at her, its claw-like hands reaching for her throat. Dale didn't think, he acted. Grabbing a fire extinguisher from the wall, he swung it with all his strength. The metal connected with the creature's head, a sickening crunch echoing through the car as it collapsed. Come on, he urged, pulling the older woman along. The passengers surged into the next car, slamming the door shut behind them. Dale twisted the lock, his chest heaving. "Hold on to that feeling," echoed faintly in his head as adrenaline surged through him. "What the hell is going on?" the young man from the couple demanded, his voice shaking. His girlfriend sobbed into his shoulder, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I don't know," Dale said, leaning against the door. "But those things, they're not human." The older woman nodded, her face pale. They're dead. I saw one up close. It wasn't alive." The train screeched to a halt, throwing everyone off balance. Dale grabbed the pole to steady himself, his eyes darting to the window. The station platform was eerily empty, the fluorescent lights flickering above. "We need to get off this train," he said, his voice firm. "Are you crazy?" the young man snapped. "Out there could be worse. And in here is a death trap," Dale shot back. He pointed to the door, where the groans of the undead grew louder. "If we stay, we're sitting ducks." The older woman took a deep breath, her hands still shaking. "He's right, we have to go." The young man cursed under his breath, but nodded. "Fine, but we stick together." Dale led the way, pulling the emergency release lever to open the train doors. The cool night air hit his face as he stepped onto the platform. The others followed, their footsteps echoing in the empty station. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant groans of the undead. "Stay close," Dale said, gripping the fire extinguisher like a weapon. He scanned the platform, his adrenaline spiking. Shadows danced on the walls, and every flicker of movement sent his heart racing. They moved cautiously toward the exit, the tension palpable. Dale glanced back at the older woman who struggled to keep up. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone gentle. "Margaret," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're doing great, Margaret. Just stay with us." The young couple introduced themselves as Jake and Lisa, their fear evident but their resolve strengthening. Dale felt a pang of responsibility for these people. He had no idea what was happening, but he couldn't let them die. As they reached the station's exit, a figure stumbled into view. It was a man in a janitor's uniform, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His lifeless eyes locked onto the group, and he let out a guttural moan. "Shit," Dale muttered. He raised the fire extinguisher, ready to strike. The janitor lunged, and Dale swung, the impact sending the creature sprawling. Before it could rise, Dale brought the extinguisher down again, crushing its skull. Blood pooled beneath the body, the metallic scent filling the air. "Keep moving," he urged, his voice steady despite the chaos. They emerged onto the street, the cityscape before them, a scene of utter devastation. Fires burned in the distance, their orange glow illuminating the darkened skyline. The distant sound of sirens and screams echoed through the air. Cars were abandoned in the streets, their doors hanging open. Bodies, some moving, some still, littered the sidewalks. Dale tightened his grip on the fire extinguisher, his jaw set. "Streetlight people, living just to find emotion," echoed in his mind. He took a deep breath and faced the others. "We're not safe yet." Kenny slouched in a ripped leather booth near the back of Star Cabaret, nursing a lukewarm beer and watching the entertainment with bleary eyes. The club was dimly lit, save for the flashing neon lights that bathed the stage in garish colors. The place smelled like a cocktail of stale piss, spilled beer, and cheap disinfectant, with only the occasional waft of sweet perfume from the dancers to mask the stench when they got close enough. He had been through a stack of ones faster than Homer Simpson devours donuts, tossing them onto the stage with little enthusiasm. It had been a shitty day. His boss had chewed him out at the auto repair shop for something he didn't even do, and his ex-girlfriend had left another spiteful voicemail that he'd yet to delete. Star Cabaret wasn't his usual haunt, but tonight it felt like the perfect place to drown his sorrows in mediocrity. A new dancer climbed onto the stage, wobbling slightly in sky-high heels. Her makeup was smeared, her hair unkempt, and her costume looked like it had been through a war. Kenny wrinkled his nose. "Jesus," he muttered under his breath, "she looks rougher than I feel." Deciding he needed something stronger than beer, Kenny stood, brushed past the other patrons, and headed toward the bar. The bartender, a burly man with a shaved head and tattoos crawling up his neck, raised an eyebrow as Kenny slid onto a stool. "Hennessy," Kenny said. "Make it 2." The bartender poured the shots without a word, and Kenny tossed the first one back in a single gulp. The burn was sharp, but it did little to dull the edge of his mood. He reached for the second shot, but before he could drink it, the DJ's voice crackled through the speakers. "All right, folks, let's give it up for Candy on stage," he drawled, dragging out the syllables like he was announcing a prize fight. As if on cue, the opening notes of Daryl Hall and John Oates' Man-Eater blared through the club's sound system. Kenny rolled his eyes and took his second shot, muttering, "This night can't get any worse." He was wrong. As the beat dropped, Candy stumbled toward the edge of the stage, her movements sporadic. She acted like a crackhead. Her head snapped to the side, and she locked eyes with a man sitting front and center. With alarming speed, she lunged at him, sinking her teeth into his neck, ripping out neck muscle and tendon. The man screamed, a blood-curdling sound that cut through the music. "She only comes out at night," crooned the speakers as chaos erupted in the room. "Holy shit!" Kenny yelled, nearly falling off his stool. He turned to see the crowd scatter as the man on the floor thrashed beneath Candy, blood pooling around him. Several patrons rushed to pull her off, but she turned on them, biting and clawing with feral intensity. Each victim fell quickly, only to rise moments later with the same dead-eyed hunger. "Is this some kind of fucked up promo?" Someone near the bar shouted, but the panic in their voice suggested they already knew the answer. More dancers emerged from the dressing room, their once glamorous costumes now torn and blood-stained. One of them, a towering blonde with a missing shoe, snarled as she leapt onto a table, scattering bottles and glasses. The patrons, those still standing, screamed and bolted for the exit. Kenny's heart pounded as he ducked behind the bar, peeking out just in time to see a man wielding a chair like a lion tamer. The zombie dancer hissed at him, then lunged, dragging him to the floor. "The woman is wild, a she-cat tamed by the purr of a jaguar," the song continued, the irony almost too much to bear. "Great," Kenny muttered. "Fucking great." He grabbed a bottle of vodka from the shelf behind him and held it like a club. His mind raced. He needed to get out, but the chaos made it impossible to see a clear path to the door. The bartender didn't share Kenny's caution. With a growl, he vaulted over the bar, wielding a baseball bat that had been stashed beneath the counter. "Come on, you dead freaks," he roared, swinging wildly at the nearest zombie. He managed to knock one back, but another grabbed him from behind, sinking its teeth into his shoulder. The bat fell to the floor with a hollow thud. Kenny winced. "Guess it's every man for himself," he muttered, edging toward the service door behind the bar. A high-pitched scream cut through the din, drawing his attention to a group of patrons huddled near the stage. A young woman in a sequined dress was holding off a zombie with a broken bottle, her eyes wide with terror. "God damn it," Kenny hissed. Against his better judgment, he vaulted over the bar and charged toward the group, swinging the vodka bottle like a madman. "Wouldn't if she could," sang the speakers as Kenny smashed the bottle over the zombie's head. Glass and blood sprayed in all directions, and the creature fell back, dazed but not out. Kenny grabbed the young woman's arm and yanked her to her feet. "Run!" he barked. They sprinted toward the exit, dodging overturned tables and flailing bodies. The girl stumbled once, and Kenny hauled her up without breaking stride. "What's your name?" he shouted over the chaos. "Lila," she gasped. "All right, Lila, stick with me. We're getting out of here." They reached the door just as another dancer, this one missing an arm, lunged at them. Kenny grabbed a nearby stool and swung it like a batter going for a home run. The zombie's jaw snapped with a sickening crack, and it crumpled to the floor. "The beast is in the night," the song continued, as if narrating the carnage. Lila sobbed, clinging to Kenny's arm as they burst out into the cool night air. The parking lot was eerily empty, save for a few abandoned cars. Kenny scanned the area, his chest heaving. "You got a ride?" he asked. Lila shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I came with friends. They didn't make it." Kenny cursed under his breath. He spotted a pickup truck with the driver's side door hanging open. "Come on," he said, pulling her toward it. The keys were still in the ignition, and Kenny silently thanked whatever poor bastard had abandoned it. He climbed in and started the engine, motioning for Lila to get in. As she slid into the passenger seat, he glanced back at the club. Flames licked the edges of the roof, and the muffled strains of Man-Eater could still be heard over the screams. "Oh, the beauty is there, but a beast is in the heart," the song crooned as Kenny floored the gas pedal. "What the hell just happened?" Lila whispered, her voice trembling. Kenny shook his head. "I don't know," he said grimly, "but whatever it is, it's not stopping here." Pastor Thomas stood firm at the pulpit, his voice echoing through the grand hall of the First Church of Eternal Light. The old wooden beams creaked as he raised his hands toward the vaulted ceiling, his rich baritone voice filled with conviction. The congregation before him, about 50 souls, sat hunched in their pews, their faces pale and drawn. Some clutched rosaries, others wiped sweat from their brows. A wave of sickness had overtaken the town, and they had gathered here seeking divine intervention. "Brothers and sisters, do not be afraid," Pastor Thomas bellowed, his arms wide in an embrace to his ailing flock. "For in times of darkness the Lord shall be our guiding light." A chorus of murmured amens filled the room, though many sounded weak, their voices trembling with exhaustion. A woman near the front coughed violently into her handkerchief. A man beside her rubbed at his temples, sweat rolling down his face. The entire church reeked of illness and desperation, yet the faith within these walls remained unshaken. Then, from the back of the church, the unmistakable sound of an electric guitar screeched to life. "Take a look to the sky just before you die. It is the last time you will." The opening chords of For Whom the Bell Tolls by Metallica blasted through the church speakers. Heads turned, eyes widened in confusion. Who in the Lord's name turned that on? Pastor Thomas demanded, his thick brows furrowing. Before an answer could come, the heavy wooden doors of the church exploded inward. Splinters rained down as a monstrous horde of undead came pouring in, a tidal wave of rotting flesh and soulless eyes. They moaned in unison, their decayed mouths gaping, their arms reaching hungrily for the terrified worshippers. Screams erupted as the congregation scattered. Some tripped over pews, others dropped to their knees in frantic prayer. An elderly man swung his Bible at an oncoming zombie, only to have his throat torn out in one swift motion. Pastor Thomas, however, was not an ordinary priest. From beneath his robes, he reached inside and withdrew two massive, chrome-plated 50-caliber Desert Eagle pistols. The congregation gasped as he cocked both weapons with the skill of a seasoned warrior. "The power of Christ compels you, motherfuckers," he roared, unleashing twin barrages of gunfire into the incoming horde. The shots thundered through the church, each bullet finding its mark with righteous fury. Zombie heads exploded like overripe pumpkins, their bodies collapsing in heaps of gore. The music pounded in the background, the drum beats synchronizing perfectly with each gunshot. For a hill, men would kill. Why? They do not know. The blood-splattered priest turned, his pistols blazing, dropping zombies one by one. The sheer absurdity of the scene, an armed-to-the-teeth pastor delivering headshots in rhythm to Metallica, would have been comedic if not for the dire circumstances. As his clips ran empty, Pastor Thomas pivoted and sprinted toward the back of the church, where a locked weapons cabinet stood beside the altar. Kicking it open, he revealed an arsenal that would make a warlord jealous: an AR-15, two 9mm pistols, and an ammo belt emblazoned with a silver cross. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he mused as he strapped on the belt and slung the AR-15 over his shoulder. Reloading his Desert Eagles, he vaulted off the stage, landing squarely in the chaos. Make his fight on the hill in the early day. The pews were overturned, bodies littering the floor, both living and undead. A zombified usher lunged at him, its mouth gaping wide. Without breaking stride, Pastor Thomas unloaded a full clip from his AR-15, shredding the creature into holy confetti. "I have read the book of Revelations," he muttered, taking aim at another incoming ghoul. "And this ain't how it ends." With precise, calculated bursts, he mowed down zombies left and right. A particularly aggressive one, wearing the tattered remains of a choir robe, shrieked as it lunged. Pastor Thomas sidestepped and, with a move straight out of an action movie, grabbed a nearby brass candlestick and impaled it through the creature's eye socket. "The body of Christ," he quipped, watching it slump to the floor. The music pulsed in the background, fueling his holy rampage. After what felt like an eternity but was in reality mere minutes, the church fell silent. The last undead groaned one final time before Pastor Thomas delivered a point-blank headshot. Its body slumped over a pew, staining the velvet cushions with gore. Panting, the priest wiped sweat from his brow and surveyed the aftermath. "You all okay?" he asked the few remaining survivors, who stared at him like he had descended from heaven itself. One of them, a trembling teenager, pointed at him. "Father, what the hell was that?" Pastor Thomas holstered his pistols, adjusted his collar, and smirked. Divine intervention. The groaning from outside snapped him back to reality. The horde was still out there. They were drawn to sound, and that meant more were on the way. He needed a vantage point. Moving quickly, he made his way to the back stairs leading up to the church's rooftop. At the top, he uncovered his secret weapon, a 50-caliber long-range sniper rifle, fitted with a silencer. Kneeling, he peered through the scope. The city streets were filled with shambling corpses, wandering aimlessly in search of fresh prey. Pastor Thomas took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Take a look to the sky just before you die. He squeezed the trigger. A zombie's head popped like a melon, sending chunks flying in all directions. He adjusted his aim and fired again and again. It is the last time you will. One by one, the undead fell, their lifeless bodies crumpling onto the pavement. The music played on, but as the final riff faded, so did the last of his targets. The city was quiet. Pastor Thomas stood, slinging the sniper rifle over his shoulder. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. The Lord's work was never done. Across town, in a dimly lit apartment cluttered with energy drink cans and gaming peripherals, Glock 9, a famous YouTuber renowned for his brutal 7 Days to Die gameplay, woke up to the sounds of chaos. A distant explosion rattled his window, and the usual hum of city life had been replaced by distant screams and the eerie moans of something unnatural. He groggily rubbed his eyes, blinking at the flickering red glow outside. The world outside his window looked exactly like the zombie-infested wastelands he spent thousands of hours surviving in his favorite survival horror game. But this wasn't a game. "All right," he muttered, sitting up. "This is either the best day of my life or the worst." Instinct kicked in. He reached for the nearest weapon, a wooden baseball bat that he had decorated with duct tape and spray-painted headshot across the barrel. Grabbing his gaming earbuds, he jammed them in and scrolled through his playlist, landing on Down with the Sickness by Disturbed. "Ooh, wah!" The aggressive intro blasted through his ears as he stood and cracked his neck, rolling his shoulders. He exhaled sharply, gripping the bat tighter. "All right, zombies," he smirked. "Let's see if all my hours of gaming actually meant something." Kicking open his apartment door, Glock 9 found himself face to face with his first zombie. It was his neighbor, Old Man Jerry, or at least what was left of him. His jaw hung unnaturally, his cloudy eyes locked onto Glock 9 with primal hunger. "Damn, Jerry," he said. "I knew you were slow before, but now you're really taking your time." With one swift motion, he swung the bat. The wood connected with Jerry's skull with a satisfying crack. The old man dropped like a sack of potatoes. Glock 9 smirked, stepping over the body. One down, millions to go. He jogged down the street, scanning for supplies and weapons. Chaos was everywhere. People ran in all directions, some being tackled by zombies and torn apart like something out of Dawn of the Dead. Car alarms blared, smoke billowed from multiple buildings. As he turned a corner, he spotted an abandoned cop car parked sideways in the road. The driver's door was open and blood smeared the asphalt. "Well, well, well," Glock 9 said, approaching cautiously. He popped the trunk and grinned like a kid on Christmas morning. Inside, he found exactly what he needed: an AR-15, a shotgun, and several boxes of ammo. Drowning deep in my sea of loathing, the song continued as he loaded his new toys. "Oh, it's about to get real fun," he muttered, racking a shell into the shotgun. Fully armed and dangerously overconfident, Glock 9 strutted down the street, blasting zombies in the face with calculated precision. Every shot was a headshot. Every movement was smooth, tactical, just like in his games. The only thing missing was his chat-spamming emotes. "This is Glock 9. Live from the apocalypse," he said to no one in particular. "Remember to like, comment, and subscribe." A zombie lunged at him from an alley. Without hesitation, he flipped the shotgun one-handed and blasted it in the face. The explosion of gore painted the brick wall behind it red. "It seems what's left of my human side is slowly changing." Glock 9 kicked open a convenience store door and scavenged what he could: bottled water, jerky, and more ammo. The place had already been looted, but he found a few hidden treasures behind the counter. Suddenly, a noise from the back made him freeze. He raised his AR-15 and moved toward the storeroom. A low growl rumbled behind the door. "All right, let's see who's home," he muttered before kicking it open. A zombie clerk stumbled out, knocking over shelves. Glock 9 instinctively fired, shredding its head in an instant. As it fell, he spotted a security camera mounted in the corner. He grinned at it. "This kill was sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends," he joked, reloading his rifle. As the sun dipped below the ruined skyline, Glock 9 knew he needed a place to settle for the night. He found an empty townhouse with a sturdy rooftop and climbed up, securing the ladder behind him. Sitting cross-legged, he surveyed the burning city. Zombies wandered aimlessly in the streets below, feasting on whatever unlucky stragglers remained. This is some I Am Legend shit, he muttered, biting into a protein bar. He set up his rifle, adjusting the scope. Through the lens, he lined up a shot. A zombie with half its torso missing was dragging itself across the pavement. "No, Mommy, don't do it again! Don't do it again! I'll be a good boy," the song blared in his ears as he pulled the trigger. The round punched through the zombie's skull, sending it sprawling. "Why do you have to hit me like that, Mommy?" Glock 9 let out a laugh. "Man, I'm having way too much fun." For the next hour, he picked off zombies from the rooftop, racking up headshots like he was still in a video game. He even began commentating his shots, rating his kills. 10-10 splatter on that one, he said, watching a zombie's head pop like a watermelon. "Open up your hate and let it flow into me." He reloaded and leaned back, staring at the darkening sky. The song faded out, leaving him in silence for the first time all day. For a brief moment, he thought about what tomorrow might bring. How long could he keep this up? Could he find other survivors? Maybe even start a real live stream if he could power up his laptop. Then, in the distance, something caught his eye. A convoy of vehicles moving down the street. Survivors. "Well," he grinned, standing up and slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "Looks like I might have an audience after all." And with that, Glock 9 prepared for the next level of survival. Old man Fred sat on his porch in a weathered rocking chair, sipping a steaming cup of coffee as he meticulously cleaned his Colt 1911. The sun cast a warm glow over his small suburban front yard, where his prized tulips stood in neat rows, a testament to his stubbornness and green thumb. Fred, a Vietnam veteran, had seen his fair share of hell, but he never thought he'd be defending his flowers from some disrespectful asshole trampling through them. His eyes squinted as he spotted a shambling figure staggering across his lawn, boots crushing the delicate tulip petals. His weathered face twisted in annoyance. "Hey, jackass! Get the hell off my flowers!" he barked, setting his coffee down and gripping his pistol. The figure ignored him. "Must be one of them meth heads from downtown," Fred muttered, standing up, placing the 1911 back in his holster. He stepped down from the porch, cracking his knuckles. "I ain't gonna tell you again, son," he said, standing his ground. Then the figure lunged. Fred sidestepped with the reflexes of a man who had been in worse scrapes. The thing's arms flailed wildly, its mouth snapping open to reveal blood-stained teeth, chunks of flesh still wedged between them. "Oh, hell no," Fred grumbled, stepping back. His hand went to his hip, drawing his 9mm in one fluid motion. "Buddy, you got about 3 seconds to turn around before I turn your head into a canoe," Fred warned, leveling the gun at the thing's chest. It just moaned, a hollow, inhuman sound, and took another step forward. Then 2 more figures stumbled onto his lawn, their jaws slack, fingers stained red with the remnants of whatever poor soul they had feasted on before arriving in Fred's personal space. "Oh, God damn it," Fred muttered. At that moment, his neighbor, Todd, a middle-aged man who still tucked his polos into his khakis, came jogging over. "Fred, what the hell is going on over here?" Todd never finished his sentence. One of the figures turned, lunged at him, and before Todd could react, they were on him, teeth sinking into his neck, ripping away flesh like a dog tearing into a steak. Todd screamed, flailing, his khaki pants now a shade of deep red as the zombies tore him apart. The radio inside Fred's house clicked on, and suddenly, the upbeat tune of Queen's "Don't Stop Me Now" filled the air. "Tonight I'm gonna have myself a real good time." Fred exhaled, shaking his head as he watched Todd's demise. "Told you should have bought a gun, Todd." The creatures turned their attention back to him. He fired 3 shots into their chests. Nothing. "Son of a bitch," Fred grumbled, then aimed for their heads. 3 clean shots later, and the zombies hit the ground like sacks of rotten potatoes. For a moment, all was still. Then Todd, or what used to be Todd, twitched and slowly began to rise. "Ah, hell, I ain't dealing with this," Fred muttered, stomping up his porch stairs and into his house. Inside, he moved with the calm efficiency of a man who had seen war and lived to tell the tale. He went straight to his gun cabinet, pulling out his favorite rifle, a Winchester 30-30 lever action that had taken down more deer than he could count. He slung an ammo belt over his shoulder, the silver bullets gleaming against the light. Outside, Todd was fully on his feet now, his dead eyes scanning for his next meal. Fred opened the door, stepping onto the porch. and leveled the rifle. "Todd, buddy, you were always a pain in the ass. I'm a shooting star leaping through the sky, like a tiger defying the laws of gravity." Fred fired. Todd's head popped like a balloon filled with bad decisions. With a sigh, Fred pumped the lever and looked around. The street wasn't quiet anymore. More of them were coming. A whole damn horde. "Well, ain't this some shit?" Fred muttered. There was only one place that made sense to go, the church. He always went on Sundays, but something in his gut had told him to stay home today. Maybe it was divine intervention, or maybe it was because he really wanted to finish watching his Walker, Texas Ranger reruns. Either way, it was time to move. The church run, Fred stepped off his porch, rifle raised, whistling along with the song as he made his way down the street. He wasn't running. Hell no. He was old, not stupid. Running just made you tired, and he had plenty of bullets to clear a path at his own pace. One by one, he took them out. A teenage zombie missing half its face lunged at him from a driveway. Bang. Gone. A mailman, still clutching a bag of unopened letters, groaned and reached for him. Bang. Delivered straight to hell. "I'm a racing car passing by like Lady Godiva." He turned a corner and finally saw the church in the distance. The stained glass windows were intact, but the front doors were wide open. That wasn't good. Fred picked up the pace, stepping over corpses as he reached the church steps. As he got closer, he saw Pastor Thomas standing outside, holding what looked like a damn AR-15. "Thomas, you son of a bitch," Fred called out, stepping up beside him. The pastor grinned. "Fred, I was wondering when you'd show up." "Nice hardware you got there," Fred said, eyeing the rifle. "The Lord helps those who help themselves," Thomas replied, chambering around. The music from Fred's radio inside his house was still playing in the distance, now at the final chorus. "Don't stop me! Don't stop me! Don't stop me! Hey, 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 hey!" The horde was coming, a mass of rotten flesh pouring down the street. Fred rolled his shoulders and cracked his neck. "So what's the plan, preacher?" Pastor Thomas smirked, aiming down his sights. "We thin the herd, and then we pray." Fred chuckled, raising his Winchester. "Well, let's get to thinning." And with that, the old war veteran and the gun-slinging preacher opened fire, sending lead and holy vengeance downrange as the undead tide crashed against them. The city was in ruins. Buildings smoldered, their glass windows shattered from the chaos that erupted mere hours ago. Car alarms blared in the distance, sirens wailed sporadically, and the moans of the undead echoed through the streets like a nightmarish symphony. Somewhere, from an abandoned vehicle's speakers, Thriller by Michael Jackson played eerily on repeat, the chorus mixing strangely well with the sounds of horror. John T. wiped sweat from his brow as he ducked behind an overturned SUV, clutching the blood-stained pool cue that had already cracked more zombie skulls than he could count. Behind him, Dale panted, gripping his fire extinguisher, which was now more dented than useful. Margaret, still clutching her knitting bag as if it could ward off the undead, took a deep breath. "We need to keep moving," John whispered, peeking out onto the main road. Dale nodded. "We're still headed to that church, right?" "That's the plan," John said. "But we need more weapons. My cue's about one whack away from breaking." Margaret sniffled. "I just want to sit down." Dale chuckled grimly. "Lady, you and me both." As they crept forward, the distant sound of an engine revving caught their attention. A black truck skidded around the corner, mowing down a small group of zombies before screeching to a halt. The door flung open, and a man hopped out, swinging a bat with the words "headshot" spray-painted across it. "Hey!" Glock 9 yelled. "Y'all need a ride?" John and Dale exchanged looks before sprinting toward the truck. Inside the truck, Kenny sat in the passenger seat, shotgun resting on his lap. The radio played softly, shifting through various channels of static before suddenly landing on "Don't Fear the Reaper" by Blue Oyster Cult. "Oh, come on," Kenny groaned. "That's cliché even for an apocalypse." Glock 9 grinned. "Hey, let the atmosphere build, man." As they sped through the city, weaving between wrecked cars and roaming undead, they encountered another roadblock, a horde of zombies, packed so tightly they looked like an impenetrable wall of rotting flesh. "I got this," Glock 9 announced, cracking his knuckles. John raised an eyebrow. "What, you gonna ask them nicely to move?" "No," Glock 9 said, reaching into the back seat and pulling out an old-school boombox. "I'm gonna distract them." Dale groaned. "Please tell me you're not about to." The first notes of "I Will Survive" by Gloria Gaynor blared through the speakers as Glock 9 placed the boombox on the roof of a nearby car. For a moment the zombies seemed confused, their grotesque faces turning toward the source of the music. Then, one by one, they started shuffling in its direction. "Son of a bitch," Dale muttered. "It's working." With the horde momentarily distracted, the group gunned it down a side street, making their way toward the church. They thought they were in the clear until they reached an abandoned elementary school. A playground stood eerily silent, its swings creaking in the wind. Margaret shuddered. "I don't like this." Neither did anyone else. But before they could react, the first figure appeared, a small, ragged body no taller than a fourth grader. Its face was pale, its eyes sunken, and it let out a high-pitched moan. Then more emerged, dozens of them, zombie kids. John swore under his breath. "This is wrong." Glock 9 gulped. "Nope, nope, nope." Dale, gripping his fire extinguisher again, whispered, "We can't just leave them like this." The radio inside a nearby school bus suddenly crackled to life, playing "Tiptoe Through the Tulips" by Tiny Tim. The haunting melody sent a collective shiver down their spines as the zombie kids began running, not shuffling, running, toward them. "Okay, screw this," Kenny yelled, raising his shotgun. The next 60 seconds were a blur of gunfire, swinging weapons and panicked yells as the group fought their way through the pint-sized terrors. The only solace came when they finally reached the end of the block and slammed the gate shut behind them. Breathing heavily, Margaret leaned against a car. "I am too damn old for this." John wiped his bat clean on his pants. "We're never speaking of this again." Glock 9 nodded solemnly. Agreed. As they approached the church, they saw another group already inside, Fred and Pastor Thomas, standing guard on the roof. The two old-timers had been picking off zombies from a sniper perch, their weapons glinting in the firelight. Fred grinned. Well, look what the apocalypse dragged in." Pastor Thomas called down. "You boys got any faith left?" Kenny smirked. "Only in my aim." The church doors swung open, and the survivors rushed inside just as another horde crested the hill. As the doors slammed shut and were barricaded, the group exhaled in unison. John turned to Fred. "You got a plan?" Fred adjusted his rifle. "Plan's simple. We hold, we shoot, we survive." Pastor Thomas nodded. "And we pray." Glock 9 grinned. "Hell yeah." From outside, a car alarm suddenly went off. The speakers blasted "Highway to Hell" by AC/DC. Kenny chuckled. "Well, that's poetic." John loaded his bat with nails. "Let's get to work." John T. and Dale led their small group through the wreckage of downtown, stepping over bodies, some moving, some thankfully still. Glock 9, Kenny, Lila, and the others followed close behind, their weapons raised. Every shadow was suspect. Every movement could be their last. From an abandoned police cruiser, "Don't Stop Believin'" by Journey played on repeat, eerily filling the air as a car's emergency lights flickered weakly. "Jesus," muttered Kenny. "This feels like the cheesiest horror movie I've ever been in." John T. chuckled darkly. "Except we ain't got a script telling us we make it to the credits." The church steeple finally came into view through the ruins. Standing tall amidst the devastation, its stained glass windows still intact, the First Church of Eternal Light was their last shot at sanctuary. Outside the church, Old Man Fred and Pastor Thomas stood like sentinels, picking off zombies from the rooftop with expert precision. Each shot was methodical, calculated, headshots only. Fred squinted through his scope. "Looks like we got company," he muttered. Pastor Thomas smirked. "About time. Let's get them inside." The heavy wooden doors creaked as the survivors rushed inside, pushing the barricades back into place just as the undead horde caught their scent. The moaning outside intensified as dozens, maybe hundreds of zombies began to gather, their clawed hands pounding against the church doors. Inside, the survivors collapsed against the pews, catching their breath. The radio in the back crackled to life. Then from the church's old, crackling speakers, the heavy guitar riffs of "Enter Sandman" by Metallica began to play. "Say your prayers, little one. Don't forget, my son, to include everyone." Dale blinked. "Oh, that's just perfect." Glock 9 grinned, reloading his AR-15. "If we're going out, at least it's with a kick-ass soundtrack." Pastor Thomas stepped forward, his AR-15 slung over his shoulder. "This is our last stand, folks. We've got supplies, we've got ammo, and we've got faith." Kenny exhaled. "Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad." Fred huffed. Less talking, more fortifying. Let's get to work. Under Fred's direction, they got to work barricading the church. Pews were flipped and nailed across the windows. Wooden doors reinforced with iron bars from old candle stands. Chains were wrapped around the entrance gates. Meanwhile, Margaret took stock of their food and water. "We're low," she said gravely. "We can hold out for a few days, but we'll need a supply run soon." Lila, still gripping her crowbar, glanced outside. "Not unless we can clear the street first. There's too many." Kenny peeked through a crack in the barricade. "We could use a distraction." Glock 9 smirked. "Funny you should say that." From his backpack, he pulled out a Bluetooth speaker. Pressing a button, the haunting opening notes of Thriller by Michael Jackson filled the air. Dale's jaw dropped. "You have got to be kidding me." Outside, the zombies twitched as if momentarily confused, but as the beat kicked in, they started moving toward the sound. Glock 9 shrugged. "Hey, worked last time." With the horde momentarily distracted, Fred, Thomas, and Kenny started picking off zombies one by one from the rooftop. The sound of gunfire mixed with the music in a surreal, chaotic harmony. "'Cause this is Thriller! Thriller night!" John T. kicked open a side door, leading a small team outside. "We thin them out, we secure the perimeter, and we survive the night." The others nodded. The battle was on. The fight was brutal. Zombies poured in waves, but they fought with everything they had. Fred's lever-action Winchester cracked shot after shot, never missing. Glock 9 moved like he was streaming live, hitting headshots with pinpoint accuracy. Kenny dual-wielded pistols like some action hero, laughing like a madman as he fired into the horde. Pastor Thomas swung a shovel when his ammo ran low, knocking a zombie's head clean off. "The Lord is my shepherd," he muttered, "and I am his shotgun." Margaret even got in on the action, stabbing an undead with her knitting needles. "I'm too old for this shit," she wheezed. Lila took down a crawler with her crowbar before yelling, "Are we winning?" Dale, smashing a zombie's face in with his bat, yelled back, "I have no idea." The music shifted. Highway to Hell by AC/DC blared from another nearby car, blending into the chaos. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but finally, as the last zombie fell, silence settled over the churchyard. The undead were no more. Breathing heavily, Fred reloaded his rifle. Well, that was fun. Glock 9 slumped against a wall. "I don't think I have enough storage space on my brain to process all that." Pastor Thomas wiped sweat from his brow. "The church is secure," Margaret exhaled. "So, what now?" John T. stood up, brushing off his jacket. "We rest, we eat, and in the morning, we figure out where the hell we go from here." Kenny nodded. "And maybe, just maybe, we find more survivors." Fred adjusted his hat, staring out at the blood-soaked street. "One thing's for sure," Glock 9 grinned. "What's that?" Fred chuckled. "The Lord works in mysterious ways." The church bell rang once, echoing through the empty streets. 18 months had passed since the world had crumbled. The streets outside the First Church of Eternal Light were still littered with abandoned cars and the decayed remains of the early fallen. Yet within the reinforced walls of their sanctuary, life had begun again. A community had formed under the watchful eye of Pastor Thomas, their spiritual leader, their tactician, and when necessary, their enforcer. Through faith, discipline, and the occasional well-placed bullet, they had carved out an existence amidst the ruins of civilization. The once holy sanctuary now functioned as a self-sufficient settlement. The pews had been repurposed into barricades, tables, and beds. The stained glass windows remained, a colorful reminder of hope, though bullet holes and boarded sections told the story of many battles fought. Outside, the yard had been transformed into a sprawling farm, growing everything from potatoes to tomatoes, all watered by a jury-rigged irrigation system using salvaged rain barrels. John T. and Kenny patrolled the perimeter, weapons slung over their shoulders. Glock 9 sat on a perch in the bell tower, his sniper rifle resting on a ledge, keeping a watchful eye on the wasteland beyond. Fred was near the gates, teaching a group of younger survivors how to properly reload and fire their weapons. Lila and Margaret were in the kitchen, whipping up what passed as stew from the latest harvest. And then there was Pastor Thomas. Clad in his now weathered yet still regal black robe, he stood in the pulpit, addressing the community that had grown around him. "The Lord provides," he began, looking over the gathered survivors. He has given us the strength to endure, the wisdom to rebuild, and the firepower to remind the wicked that his house is no place for thieves. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Outside, an old, barely functioning speaker system crackled to life. "Livin' on a Prayer" by Bon Jovi blasted through, a signal that another supply run team had returned safely. "Oh, come on," Kenny muttered. "This song again?" John T. chuckled. "It's a classic." Fred smirked. "We're literally living on a prayer, so yeah, it fits." The main gate swung open, revealing the supply team, 3 grim-faced men and women carrying bags of canned goods, ammo, and medical supplies. Dale, now bearded and looking like a grizzled veteran of the apocalypse, carried a crate labeled "Property of U.S. Military." "Got a gift," Dale announced, setting the crate down at Pastor Thomas's feet. Pastor Thomas crouched down, pried it open, and exhaled. "Grenades," he said with an amused grin. "God does work in mysterious ways." The community was thriving, but the world outside had not grown any kinder. The undead still lurked beyond the walls, but worse than that, the living had become just as dangerous. One such group had been circling their sanctuary for the past week, scouting, watching. They had not made their move yet, but everyone inside the church knew it was only a matter of time. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, shadows moved along the tree line. Kenny, keeping watch from the roof, noticed the figures first. "We got company," he called down. Pastor Thomas sighed. "We knew this day would come." He motioned for Fred and Glock 9 to join him on the rooftop. Below, the others prepared for what was coming. As the figures stepped into the dying sunlight, a voice rang out. "We know you've got supplies," a gruff man called. "We don't want to kill you, just want to share in what you got." Pastor Thomas smiled coldly, lifting his AR-15. "The Lord teaches us to be charitable," he called back, "but he also teaches us not to suffer fools." The standoff stretched into a long silence. Then, from one of the cars near the gates, a faint tune started playing. "I see a bad moon a-risin'." Fred chuckled. "Oh, that's just poetic." The first shot rang out. The siege had begun. The battle was chaos. Bullets cracked through the air. Zombies, drawn by the noise, started swarming toward the gunfire. Glock 9 picked off invaders one by one from the bell tower. Lila and Margaret worked to keep the non-combatants safe, while Dale and Kenny patrolled the perimeter, ensuring no one breached the inner walls. John T. fought like a man possessed, swinging his bat like a warrior from a different age, while Pastor Thomas waded into battle, shotgun in hand, quoting scripture between every blast. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil." Boom! Another raider fell. The battle raged for an hour, then silence. Bodies, both human and undead, littered the ground outside the church. The raiders had been repelled. Some lay dead. The lucky ones ran. The unlucky ones had been torn apart by the zombies drawn to the fight. Pastor Thomas reloaded and looked around. "Status?" Fred wiped blood from his rifle. "We're good. A few scrapes, but no casualties." Kenny lit a cigarette. "They'll be back." Pastor Thomas nodded. "Then we'll be ready." As the sun began to rise over the sanctuary, a feeling of peace settled over the survivors. They had been tested, and once again, they had survived. The radio crackled. Someone turned the dial, and "We Will Rock You" by Queen blared through the speakers. Glock 9 laughed, leaning against the bell tower. "Hell yeah!" Pastor Thomas looked over his flock, his people, and smiled. They were not just survivors. They were the future, and nothing, not the dead, not the desperate, not the wicked, would take that from them.